Good morning, my math class, or I should say my quadrilaterals, because today we're talking about quadrilaterals. What is a quadrilateral? Well, that word quad means four, right? So just like a triangle had three sides, well, quadrilaterals have four sides. And you can see down here lots of different types of quadrilaterals. Let's look at some of these different types. Some of them may look familiar to you, like a square. In a square, all the sides are equal, right? All the sides are congruent, and you'll notice all the angles are 90 degrees. How is that different from a rectangle? Well, in a rectangle, all the angles are 90 degrees, right? But only the opposite sides are equal, right? So this side and this side are congruent, but not congruent to this side and this side, right? So the opposite sides are congruent, whereas in a square, all the sides are congruent, right? So very small difference between rectangles and squares. What's a parallelogram? Well, we've got this word parallel, and parallel means two lines that can go in the same direction forever without touching, right? So a parallelogram has opposite sides that are equal and parallel, right? So this side and this side are equal and they're parallel, right? They're like two train tracks. They're going to run on forever without touching each other. And then this side and this side are congruent and they're parallel, right? They're going in the same direction. Now you'll notice a parallelogram doesn't have to have right angles. So this is a parallelogram that doesn't have right angles. A rectangle is also a parallelogram, right? And so is a square because we have two sides on opposite ends that are parallel that will never touch. But a square and a rectangle have right angles, whereas a parallelogram doesn't need to have right angles. What's a trapezoid? Well, if a parallelogram has opposite sides that are parallel, a trapezoid looks like it's only got two sides that are parallel, right? This side and this side are parallel. They can go in the same direction forever and never touch. However, is this side and this side parallel? No, because if we continue with this line, eventually it's going to meet up with this line, right? So a parallelogram has two parallel sides, right? These are parallel and these are parallel, whereas a trapezoid only has one set of parallel lines. And finally, a rhombus. What is a rhombus? Well, a rhombus is similar to a parallelogram, right? Because the opposite sides are parallel. These ends are parallel, these ends are parallel, and all the sides are congruent, right? This side and this side and this side and this side are all congruent. It's kind of similar to a square, right? Except that a square has right angles, and a rhombus doesn't necessarily have to. Now, so when we're looking at quadrilaterals or quadrilaterals, we want to look at the sides and the angles, and that's pretty much what we've been doing, right? We're looking at the sides. Are the sides congruent? Are the sides parallel? And then we're also looking at these angles. Does it have right angles or not? So here's kind of a good way to think about quadrilaterals, because quadrilaterals can have more than one name, right? All of these shapes are quadrilaterals, all of them, because they all have four sides, right? Now we can take those quadrilaterals and we can split them into two. We can split them into parallelograms or trapezoids, right? Parallelograms have these opposite ends of parallel sides, whereas the trapezoids only got the one set of parallel sides, right? So that's the first way we can separate our quadrilaterals. It's just based on how many sets of parallel lines they have. Now, if you realize your quadrilateral is a parallelogram, well, then you've got options, right? Is that a rectangle, a rhombus, or a square? In other words, does it have opposite ends of congruent sides, or are all the sides the same, like in the rhombus and the square? All right. Also, does it have right angles, or does it not have right angles, right? So once you decide that, oh, it's a quadrilateral, that quadrilateral is a parallel, that quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then you can look more closely at the sides and the angles. Okay, and we're going to be using this flowchart a lot today, all right? So you'll get used to it. Now, if you discover that your quadrilateral is not a parallelogram because it only has one set of parallel lines, well then, it's a trapezoid, right? It can be an isosceles trapezoid or not, but we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to decide, oh, it's either a trapezoid or it's a parallelogram. If it's a parallelogram, what type of parallelogram is it? Okay, so let me just get rid of some of those markings so that it's not super confusing. And let's see if we can classify some quadrilaterals. So we're going to classify these three quadrilaterals, and we want to do it in as many ways as possible. We want to give them as many names as. So let's look at this first one. Okay, the first question we got to ask ourselves is this: is it a quadrilateral? Does it have four sides? Yeah, it does have four sides, right? So the first name we give it is quadrilateral. Okay. So we know it's a quadrilateral. What other names can we give it? If we know it's quadrilateral, then we have to decide, does it have two sets of parallel lines or just one set, right? So let's see. Well, it looks like these lines here are parallel, right? They're going in the same direction. And these lines here are parallel. So it has two sets of parallel lines, which means it's a parallelogram, right? All right, so not only is it a quadrilateral, but it's also a parallelogram. All right, so it's a quadrilateral, it's a parallelogram, and what else is it? So we know it's a parallelogram, so now, is it a rhombus, a rectangle, or a square? Remember, rectangles and squares have these right angles. A rhombus doesn't. So I guess the first thing we should look at, is there a right angle? I don't think so. These do not look like right angles. So that means if it doesn't have any right angles like a rectangle or square, it's a rhombus. So what do we have? We have a quadrilateral parallelogram rhombus. All right, so that one's got three names. Let's do another one. Let's look at B. All right, so B, does it have four sides? Yes. So that means it's a quadrilateral. That's the easy part, right? Quadrilateral. Now, I'll move this over here. Now let's see, what are we going to look at next? We know it's a quadrilateral, so it's either a parallelogram or not. Does it have all these parallel lines, or does it have only one set of parallel lines? Oops. Let's see. Well, I see. These are parallel, right? These are going in the same direction, but these are not. So it's only got one set of parallel lines. So that means it's a quadrilateral trapezoid. That's an easy one, right? We didn't have to go any further. Quadrilateral trapezoid. Okay. Let's do one more together. So here we go. First of all, does it have four sides? Yeah, it does. So that means it's a quadrilateral. All right, what else? Now we're going to look at some of those parallel sides, right? Let's see. It's a quadrilateral, so is it a parallelogram or a trapezoid? Does it have two sets of parallel sides or only one set of parallel sides? Well, it looks like these are parallel, right? It looks like these are parallel. So yeah, it's a parallelogram, right? Because it's got two sets of parallel sides. Parallelogram. All right, so we know it's a parallelogram. Now we got to decide what kind of parallelogram is it? Does it have these right angles or no? Let's see. Well, these kind of look like right angles, don't they? I mean, I think this is a right angle, and I think this is a right angle. This looks like a right angle. This looks like a right angle. So yeah, it's got right angles, right? Which means it's either a rectangle or a square. Now, a rectangle, remember, has opposite sides that are congruent, right? And a square, all the sides are congruent. So if I look at this, it looks like all the sides are the same length. They all look congruent. So that means it's a quadrilateral parallelogram square. All right. So we're trying to classify these in as many ways as possible. All right, guys. What I want you to do is I want you to take a look at the polygon notes. Look at the quadrilateral section at the top, and I want you to copy those notes into your notebook today. All right. No problem with the day. Just copy those notes into your notebook so that you have them during your teacher center. All right, get to work on that. I'll see you soon.